Welcome. During COVID, technology really gave learners a lifeline, but as we know, it also revealed huge disparities between communities, within countries, and the so-called digital divide. So welcome to our working session. Welcome to those of you here in the room in Geneva, and welcome to all of you who's joining us remotely for the working session on putting inclusivity at the heart of digitalisation. My name is Claire Doul, and I'm moderating along with Urs Gröbil, who's the Executive Director of the Swiss Network for Educational Innovation. He's also Professor Emeritus of e-learning at the University of Applied Sciences, Northwestern Switzerland. And Urs is the rapporteur of the session. And so when we all go back into plenary, Urs has 4 minutes to synthesize the wonderful findings of what we are going to do. There we are. Working Group 2 is in motion. It is happening. Thank you very, very much. As I was saying, Urs is the rapporteur, so he has the really difficult task of synthesizing in 4 minutes the highlights of this session. And we will be taking questions as usual from Slido. So if you're in the room, just get your mobile phone out and take a picture of the QR code. If you're joining us remotely, then you know slido.com and hashtag IC Forum. So we really want to hear from you. I see I'm going to be battling somebody who's got a bigger microphone than we have, Urs. So good luck, because Urs is going to begin by setting the scene. Urs, over to you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I have even a more difficult challenge to scram everything that I want to tell you in 10 minutes. So I will give my best, and please apologize. I will read some text that I have written and not speak that freely. To kick off this discussion here, I would like to invite you to take a look at the potential and limitations of digitalization to foster inclusive learning. I'm drawing on findings on 3 communities of practice where we have thus discussed with SDC not only how to reach learners in crisis, but also to strengthen their existing approaches to improve ICT supported learning in an increasingly digitalized society and economy. In their mission to implement inclusive quality education, these projects have faced challenges of exclusion that we are familiar with. Exclusion of individual learners, like lack of parental support, exclusion of groups like gender or ethnic background, or curfews or lockdown that we've been talking about, which would be environmental and context exclusion. Now the projects had found a way to support existing conventional approaches with digitalization. Just to give you 3 examples, enabling online interaction of teacher development in spite of curfews, or conducting online formative assessment to understand needs and questions of students so that they have been able to adapt their training during this time, or extend inclusive development approaches, for example, by involving parents or community members or industry or TV stations or many other stakeholders. The goal of digitalization of most of these efforts was mainly to enhance the potential of existing approaches against exclusion. To take an informed decision if ICT could accomplish this goal in their context, and if so, how, they had to carefully analyze the potential and limitation of ICT itself. And I would like to take a look at 3 areas with you, with 2 colleagues from the field, how what they have found out in these areas. The projects had very different prerequisites in terms of network, from no connection, learners having no access to devices, to full connection and access to devices. So we have the whole range of networks, and the projects had to decide which hardware suits best to support the learners in these networks, and as well which software can be used in these different contexts. In doing so, they could draw on the one hand on a great potential of a great variety of hardware and software that supports social contacts, interactive, collaborative learning, and assessment in all of these different areas. On the other hand, as we know, they had to consider several limitations, such as unequal access of learners to devices, a lack of communication support, high cost or high e-skills requirements for teachers and learners. The multi-channel solution implemented by Helvetas in Bhutan illustrates this challenge quite nicely. They have reached 170,000 learners through TV and radio. Very broad range, but with limited interaction and limited monitoring capabilities. A more targeted approach to support 32,000 learners with self-instructional learning material and assignments. This was supported by social messengers and learning platforms to disseminate e-content and also to answer questions of students. So here we have more interaction, but again, high danger that we even reinforce exclusion of some learners. And then a very targeted approach to support 7,500 learners with teachers in their communities in small groups. So they try to identify a specific vulnerable group and serve this group also again with social media, for example. But project monitoring showed that they overlooked, if you want to say so, urban poor areas, that they need also this kind of support if you want to support the most vulnerable. There are many examples more that I can't go into that describe scenarios exactly like this, that we can support vulnerable learners in remote areas, but there are limitations. An indispensable requirement of such solutions is a thorough analysis of the needs and potential of vulnerable learners and of their ecosystem, to create a basis for targeted hardware access, coaching support, and skills training. This has to go together. It's never just the technology, it's the combination of this. If we look at pedagogical topics, we see that in different areas that you can see here, technology can support different pedagogical approaches. But again, as I mentioned, unequal access to technology, lack of e-skills of teachers can prevent vulnerable learners to experience this benefit. Now let's take a look at this challenge based on a challenging example to support socio-emotional learning in a crisis-affected situation. We see Save the Children has supported out-of-school refugee children in foundational learning with textbooks and pads and coaching via WhatsApp to help them enter formal education. In this context, the students also received psychosocial support and were supported in their socio-emotional learning. Some key interventions that you can see here it was the analysis, of course, of access to devices and internet of the learners. There was a comprehensive training package, including peer coaching and support for teachers in the area of psychosocial support and socio-emotional learning, and caregivers as well were supported individually and in online community groups. Let's take a closer look at this example. We have Rania Hamoud with us here. She is Education and Capacity Building Coordinator of Save the Children in Lebanon and has accompanied this project. Hi Rania, thanks for joining.
Hello.
How has your week been?
My week was good, thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So just to know, how has your week been so far? You're coordinating, I guess you're very busy, not
Yes,
only during COVID.
During the last few days, I was involved in opening a new center for Save the Children. It's a community-based center. Beside the informal tented settlement, it will give a chance to Syrian and Lebanese children to walk to the center. It's because here we have a problem of transportation in Lebanon. So, and we are all very excited because it's the first time that we open face-to-face after COVID.
Great, that's wonderful. Now let's go back to COVID, and I would be interested which psychosocial challenges and limitations did students struggle with during COVID?
Okay, so during COVID, we were using WhatsApp after conducting an assessment to choose which is the most the modality that parents already have and know how to work. So the first challenge was the internet connection. As in Lebanon, there's not everybody have access to internet connection. The second problem was the availability of the devices, as maybe at a certain household they have only one device, which might be is one of the parents and not accessible for the children at all time. And for the PSS activities, children needed to have material in order to participate in these activities. And when COVID started and the lockdown, most of parents were reporting our children could not participate because if you are asking him to do certain activities in which we don't have the materials.
And how did teachers support the children with psychosocial support? Was this possible online?
What we did is we have done a training for our teacher through which we have tailored the session so they can be given remotely. We changed a lot of the sessions. For example, the sessions that were at the beginning, we have changed them into reading sessions that the children can do online with the teachers instead of the one that are there in the curriculum through which they have to participate in activities done face-to-face. So we have changed the session in order so the teachers can deliver them online.
Okay, I think for teachers that was quite a challenge. I mean, to do this support online. Which challenges did they have, and how did you support them in your groups?
Okay, mainly the first training we delivered was called the remote learning training because it was a huge shift for us to start working remotely. Some of our teachers doesn't know how to even record a video with a high quality and doesn't require a lot of megabytes. So we did a training for teachers on remote learning and how to take videos and pictures. We also provided children with what we called a remote learning kit, so that children would have at least the basic kit needed in order to do the activities and participate with their friends inside the groups. We also created the groups based on the availability of the device. So for children whom they have access to the device in the morning, we put them in one shift, which we call the first shift, and the second shift was the children who have access to device in the afternoon.
Yeah, great. you made a lot of, we see there are a lot of things you need to do. You need to supply hardware. You need to train people to use the hardware. What's your main learning from the whole project? Can you say this? What would you advise to the colleagues here?
We also provided internet bundles for parents because internet was a problem. The main finding is that whenever we have to choose which modality or we are going to use, we have to do an assessment first. For example, this is why we chose WhatsApp, because we didn't have a lot of time, and we did an assessment to ask parents what do you already have, what do you do they think as most users well, or otherwise there would be a contingency plan. Like, for example, if we are planning or we think that we might go online again and we are thinking of a certain platform, let's start introducing it from now to our beneficiaries and the children and teachers as well. So whenever we have to switch online, they would know how to use it, and it's already there in their devices.
Great. We had some problems with the sound, but I think the main point was very clear again with the analysis. Thank you very much, Rania, for joining us, and please stay tuned. I hear from you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Looking at management, as learning and teaching processes are being enriched by digital technologies, existing processes and roles change. This creates potential for innovation and improvement, but also new challenges. Examples are coaching needs to be done by teachers, e-content production by teachers, analysis of data, data security, under data security laws by the government, etc. This is even more so true if we create totally new processes. If we don't support, do we have sound on the microphone? So now, maybe for the online recording, okay? Good, thank you. So this is even more so when new processes and organizational structures are being built together with ICT. Now I'd like to take a look at the case of ASTA, of Swiss Contact in Bangladesh. This case actually helps to illustrate aspects like I'm just been talking about. The project has helped to improve health services in rural and semi-urban areas through facilitating community paramedic training. And now we have Nausheen with us, Sharmila. She was Policy and Communications Officer of ASTA and is working with Swiss Contact in Bangladesh. Hi, Nausheen. Can you hear me well?
Hi, Urs. Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Good news. That was a long day for you. You're still up. It's evening now. What have you done today?
Today was a great day at work. Today was a great day at work. My current project achieved a significant milestone. So this project also focuses on digitalization, but this time in trade.
Okay. So digitalization, once for education, and this time for trade.
For trade.
Okay, great. Now, but let's turn to your project. The use of Facebook that you have used Facebook in your project where you have posted different messages that you can talk about. That was a big success. You had a big response. Can you say something about this? I mean, what did you expect? You didn't have the experience to use Facebook, but you took the risk to use it. And what was the reaction?
Yes, I would like to give you a bit of a context here. So during the pandemic, when there was a nationwide shutdown, we had to pause our project activities. But we also needed to update the community paramedics about this disease, right? So, because they are at the forefront. Immediately, we came up with this stopgap solution of using Facebook for educational purposes. So when we were designing this intervention, we did not really think much of hitting big numbers or big results. We just wanted to update the community paramedics with the right information. But the reaction was overwhelming. For our Facebook page, this is a page with 800 likes, but each of our videos got 3,000 to 4,000 views, and we were flooded with questions regarding the pandemic, how to provide general health services during the pandemic, and some other relevant questions like that.
Wow. So people were overwhelmed, the workers. How did you react? Did you train them? Because they had to do new jobs and interact with people on Facebook.
Yeah, it was the reaction was very overwhelming for us. We did not expect it to go this big. But one thing is, social media is very common in Bangladesh. Almost everyone with that income group, lower middle class income group, they have Facebook, they have Android phone. So when we uploaded the training online, recorded trainings on Facebook page, that was in Bengali, so it was very easy to understand. It was very simple. So you just watch the videos and slowly you get to learn things about the disease. So that interest among the community paramedics. So one person told another person, that's how it got really big, and people started watching it because they got to learn things, they got to know how to operate during this pandemic as a primary healthcare service provider. So that time we created a bus, and then they started asking questions. So we involved our trainer who prepared the training material. We also we involved them to answer the questions that was in the comment box.
Yeah.
So we kind of provided ad hoc services during the training period.
Great. So it takes a lot of flexibility if you try such a new tool. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking back, you have implemented a lot of changes that we can't talk about now here. What's your main finding? What's your advice to the people here in the room and online if they want to tackle similar tasks to reach learners with, for example, social media or learning management systems?
Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway from these interventions was simplicity. Whatever the situation is, sometimes the most simplest solutions work the best. So whenever as a project management, from the project management perspective, we spend a lot of time in planning and coming up with fancy solutions, dazzling solutions, but rather than let's go and stick to simple solutions and just dive into it. Because I personally believe in the power of technology, and we have seen how technology can help in time of crisis. So the technology is there, the elements are there, just dive into it. And you have rightly pointed out flexibility. We need to go for adaptive management. You come up with a solution, you always learn along the way. As you navigate through the process, you reimagine the solution, you redesign the solution, you adjust accordingly, and you always improve. Because I think we have an advantage as a development practitioner. We never fail, we always learn. So with that mindset, you always need to learn, you always dive in, and you always go for adaptive management. You be flexible, you come up with new solutions. I think that's the biggest takeaway of my interventions.
Great. Thank you very much, Rania. It was really nice having you, and have a nice evening.
You
Bye.
too.
So, just one more minute. It's good to have a second moderator. So, I skip to the conclusion. This brief insight of some possibilities and limitations of digitalization leads me to the following tentative conclusion. To realize effective ICT-supported inclusive education in the future, I think we will have to check if ICT helps to support pedagogical intervention or helps to create totally new processes. And if we think that technology can support, and I think in many situations it will, then we need to first analyze very carefully the ecosystem, the situation of the learner. We need a targeted and tailored approach which really supports existing processes. And we need to upscale successful examples. In addition to this, at the same time, we need to continue to innovate because we have always coming up new technological possibilities. And then finally, as we all know and should be reminded of, feed the evaluation and the monitoring results that we have back into our development, to have this step-by-step development that ICT for inclusive education needs to establish. Thank you very much for the additional 2 minutes, Claire, and over to you.
Thank you, Urs, very much. And I'd just like to say to our Slido audience remotely, and also the audience in the room, that if you have any questions for Urs, then please put them on Slido. We're now going to talk to 2 education technology experts, and we're going to talk to somebody who describes himself as a digital shaman, a digital healer. So I'm really interested in what they're going to say. Please welcome. The gentleman is Professor Eddie Portman, Professor of Informatics at the Human IST Institute at the University of Fribourg. And Eddie is really someone who's passionate about creating technology that is healing. And he's also an advocate, please pay attention now, of something that he calls fuzzy logic and how it can be applied to education. So I liked what the lady from Bangladesh said, that we can never fail, we're just continuing learning. So we will learn about fuzzy logic. We are also with Susan Nicolai, who's Senior Research Fellow in the Equity and Social Policy Programme of ODI and a Research Director of EdTech Hub. So this is a global research partnership that works in 6 African and South Asian countries, and it's all about giving people the evidence that they need to make decisions about technology in education. Because as we heard from Urs, it's not always so easy. And joining us remotely from Lusaka is Lulu Lumbiwe, who's also involved in the EdTech Hub. Lulu is an entrepreneur. She's head of EL3 Learning and Development, and she consults widely on the use of education technology from early development learning to tertiary education. And also, when I found out that she works with the Roger Federer Foundation, I was particularly interested on education projects in Southern Africa. I think he needs to be on a panel. Don't you think? We'd get a lot of online listeners if he was. Let's first of all then look at the potential. We saw that COVID, if you did have access to the digital tools, it really accelerated digitalisation. So, Susan, what else worked well during COVID?
Well, I think that there's a few things that COVID changed in terms of education systems and ecosystems, and certainly globally, it raised attention to the learning crisis. It raised incredible attention to the use of technology in education, and I think that it's not seen as a side issue anymore in terms of use of technology. But the thing that I'm particularly interested in is the potential around linking and bringing engaging parents in terms of supporting learning. And there was no choice during COVID. Parents ended up being the teachers, facilitators, and what they were able to do in terms of supporting their children and other learners that may be engaged in their household made all of the difference. And there's so much evidence around the influence that parental engagement has on learners and learning outcomes. And the fact that learning environments have a bigger impact on learning gains than even parental education or income is a really important point and a really important potential that it really feels like that has been lost as we're moving out of COVID. And so one thing I noted in terms of Urs, the system that when he was looking at management and systems, it was very much about teachers, it was about education system, but then there wasn't parents weren't part of the picture. And I think that that is one piece that really needs to be picked up and looked at more systematically. How does one take the lessons and the experience of COVID and better continue to engage parents?
And do you have any sort of pointers from your research already? Because you say it was a real shame that learning outcomes are better when parents are involved, but it just dropped off.
Yeah, well, we're in the middle of research on that. There's a piece of work that we're doing at the moment with World Reader East Africa and Kenya, where we're trying to look at what are some of the different modalities to engage parents and have them support learning, and what's most effective. So anything from training of parents to use of feedback loops to nudges and messaging that can bring parents into kind of a learning space with their children.
Let's then go to Southern Africa. Lulu, what is your response on this idea that there is another part of the puzzle here, which is parental engagement? Is that something that you also see like Susan sees?
Yes. Hi, joining in from Lusaka, Zambia. Yes, I agree that there was a lot of parental engagement because it was just expected. You had no choice. Everyone was working from home as much as possible. But it also depended on where you are or where you were. So, for example, in the rural areas where you didn't have access to those digital resources during the time of COVID, the learning still took place, but it just took place in the household because the children just stayed at home. But for the urban areas, yes, we did have a lot of parental engagement. Using parents' cell phones if you had one laptop to share, because the parent had to use the laptop. So you had to share the phone with the child for you to have access to that learning. But it was also an opportunity presented itself that different ways of accessing those resources or those learning materials. We had situations where parents would be sent. I was also sent work via WhatsApp assignments and text, because that's the only way that teachers could share some information with the children, because we didn't have proper learning management systems that were set up in certain schools. So you had to get involved.
And are you seeing that parental engagement is dropping off?
Yes, I am seeing parental engagement is dropping off, as well as just the use, as we will talk about later, the use of the technologies and that blended learning approach of both using technology and going back into the classroom. That has really dropped off. And it's like we just said, now we can go back to school and try and get back to our normal lives as well. And so that needs to be brought back in. And as Susan has said, it's very important for that parental engagement from the home to the school.
So you've got parental digital literacy, but of course there's also, as we heard with some of the examples that Urs brought up, there's the digital literacy of teachers. What are you seeing in the projects that you're involved with? What works?
There is a lot of digital illiteracy from the teacher's point of view. And in some of the projects I work with, there is digital training for the teachers, but not just for the teachers to know how to use the technology, be it tablets or laptop, or how they can access digital resources, but how do they integrate that into the classroom so that they're just not learning how to use a phone to find out resources that they need, but they can use that material to also be able to teach and move away from what we have a lot of here in Southern Africa and Africa in general, that rote learning, to more inquiry-based teaching. So the digital technology or the digital skills for teachers is lacking, but it shouldn't just be on its own. It needs to be accompanied by proper pedagogy that then really shifts the education that we're working.
I'm just thinking also, Susan, I read somewhere also that most pupils are going to need digital skills in the future for the right careers. So again, this question I think came up from the panel earlier today about the digital literacy of children and whether they've got the right digital skills for the future life.
Yeah, I think digital literacy is, across all of those groups, across teachers, parents, and children themselves, is absolutely critical when one looks at inclusivity. And, evidence around digital divide is that it's growing, is that a lot of the inequalities that already exist get reinforced and widen as digital is adopted. So girls' access through digital, although there's evidence that that when they do have access, that girls actually do really well and sometimes better than boys, but all of the sociocultural norms that that limit girls' achievement and opportunities within the education and moving into the workplace space, that gets reinforced in terms of access and engagement in the digital world as well. So
equity, very important. I was just struck by what the minister said on the panel earlier about how the children in the refugee camps in Lebanon from Syria and in Jordan from Syria, that they're getting the same education as all of the other students. So it's very equitable. But of course, unfortunately, more and more children are on the move because of disaster or conflict. And so I'm just wondering what you see as the way that digitalization, digital tools can help to build equity.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential of technology and remote learning within education in emergencies and crisis, and I think a lot of that's going to get discussed over the next few days as well with the Education Cannot Wait forum that's here. But there's amazing examples, for instance, where digital personalized learning is used, where curriculum is put on tablets, where it can follow and be used by children in really remote areas. There's amazing examples of learning passports, where there's efforts around credentialing systems that can follow children on the move. So there's a lot of potential, and I think it's just at the cusp of really exploring that right now.
I will bring Eddie in a moment, but I'm just interested to hear from Lulu and Susan, because there's foundational learning, isn't there, which is numeracy and literacy. What about this socio-emotional skills, the lifelong learning? Can digital learning go beyond just those foundational skills and go, to what we're calling socio-emotional learning? Susan and then Lulu.
Yeah, well, I think with our own experience of technology, there's a big piece of it that is about connection. And I think that's true for learners, for children as well. And so there's a huge potential around socio-emotional learning through technology because of its ability to connect. But equally, there's the possibility of exclusion, and there's so many stories of where behaviors, bullying, et cetera, get translated into the digital world. And so I think it's one of those things that, again, the potential is extreme, and the dangers are probably extreme as well.
Lulu, what's your take on whether digital learning can go beyond just numeracy and literacy and starts to look at socio-emotional skills as well?
I think it can be inclusive in going beyond just the literacy and numeracy. And in cases and projects where we've worked with, where the digital learning has been offline with not much access to the internet for students, there is a safety component in there, but it brings about the connection that the students in the areas we've worked with, for example, in a project in Zimbabwe, where students in rural areas have access to digital resources that the they wouldn't otherwise have compared to the urban peers. They feel very connected, and even just interviews from the teachers, they feel, and the students themselves, they feel like they're now able to compete at a level that the urban children or those who have access to resources can do so. So there is that connection from there, and the learning is beyond definitely just the mathematics and the numeracy and the literacy. It's in everyday subjects, and in instances where the teachers provide that access to the internet to children for research, that connection grows. But it is important to also factor in that digital safety that Susan has alluded to about bullying and all that.
And Susan, just picking up on something that was said in the panel this morning by another academic, Ursula Reynolds, she was really focusing, wasn't she, on soft skills, and saying that she thought that it was the workplace that was the best place for those soft skills to be taught rather than schools. And I think a member of the audience said, clarify, please. What's your view?
Well, my view on that, and I think the evidence that I've seen, is that it's a both and rather than an either or. And you absolutely need to be looking at soft skills within schools if you're actually preparing young people for workplaces today, which really vary across low and middle income countries, and in many places aren't the formal setups that we experience, or that perhaps is more in the global north, where there's informal spaces, and the importance of soft skills in those contexts are really important as well. One of the things that we are doing as well in various research pieces is trying to start to look at the measurement of socio-emotional learning and soft skills within digital contexts. And so I think that there's some really interesting new developments happening in that space as well.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned measurement, because this is possibly a moment to bring Eddie into the conversation. He will explain much better than I do, but, technology, what potential do you see as it having for learning?
Yeah, thanks. I guess measurement is a good topic to take on here, because what we have right now is we are using technology in a passive mode, or what I also heard by the presentation before with Urs and this. They are using Facebook and other technology in a way from the technology side that the technology is not so much reacting. But these days, I don't know if you have heard of ChatGPT or other technology. So these days we have more and more machine learning, and machine learning means that the technology can also adapt and work with the students. So maybe we can think a bit in this direction where you say, like, what can technology offer? But I think always the students should be in the center to use this kind of technology. It should not be the technology. And that's sometimes also worrying me a bit when we use these traditional technology companies, because they are interested in data. So that's also what I think we could break through, and measurement is maybe the good topic here, because this technology that we are applying today is often using measurement-based interaction. ChatGPT is using that. Other technology building on machine learning is using that. And fuzzy logic is a way to come from a measurement-based computing or a measurement-based interaction to a perception-based interaction. And now I will explain a bit what is fuzzy logic.
Please explain.
Because I don't know, maybe you have heard of fuzzy logic, because it was invented more than 50 years ago at the UC Berkeley by I was the latest or the last postdoc of Lotfi Sadeh, and Lotfi Sadeh invented the logic where you can be more inclusive, because binary logic, that comes from the old Greeks, Aristotle and these guys, they said, like, something can be true or not true, there is nothing in between. And that's what is our binary logic. So we have 0 and 1s. There is nothing in between, a half a one or something like that. And a lot of this kind of technology is quite exclusive. Either you're with us or you're against us, was also a famous statement by a former president. And sometimes that's reflected in our social media. Why? Because you earn shitstorms if you do the wrong thing in certain social media circles. And fuzzy logic helps you to bridge between 0 and 1. What do I mean by that? When I say a person is tall, for example, when does tallness start? When I say something is intelligent, do I only say something is intelligent, yes or no? Or is the question rather, how intelligent is something? Same with ethics. And that is fuzzy logic. So with fuzzy logic, you apply a membership degree between 0 and 1, and you can say, you can build bridge because you can build overlaps. You can belong to this group, but also to another group. So it's more inclusive than you have to choose, are you belonging to this or that group? So that is a bit theoretically, but the thing is, with this kind of logic, you can build technology that is perception-based. So if you are driving with your car in a city, you know how far you should be apart from the next car. You should be apart from this car. That is your gut feeling. That is your perception. Google car knows exactly how far away the car is. You know, I'm so far away that I can step on the brake and it is enough, okay? And this perception should be involved in technology way more than only measurement-based. I don't know, if I ask you, is it warm in this room, or how warm it is, you could say like, it's warm, it's quite warm, but you are not able to say it's 24.6 degrees Celsius or whatever, but a machine can. So I think we should bridge this gap better also in education, that the technology is adapting to language.
So I can see that Lulu, because I'm looking at her body language, is listening intently, and so is Susan. So let me just ask you, Lulu, do you have any question about what Eddie has said and how this perception-based logic could apply to digitalisation in the sphere of education? Or any comment, if it's not a question.
A comment. I was wondering if that would be part of machine learning as well, where there is more. So it's just in a layman's term, would it be a chat GTP with perception, and then would it then work in a different context? Would it require more data in, for example, rural settings that I work in? So lots and lots of questions around that, just trying to think through it.
Yeah, great. I think we need less data, because what I worry about these days, and it was also one of these questions here that pop up, is kind of like, what is with data privacy? Because you mentioned you're using Meta tools, Facebook. Who is owning this data that Facebook is using? Is it Facebook? Is it the students? Are it the teachers? Or is it the school? So these data are used already today to learn something. So when you have interaction over, I don't know, Google technology, Facebook technology, doesn't matter which technology, WhatsApp, that means that they can train the system with that. So they can learn what is the questions of the students, what is the interaction, and now we have to deal with what, because these data points, they have a value, what or whom are these data points belonging?
Absolutely, and I think we could have quite a good discussion actually on data privacy, but just to, Susan, have you got any questions? Because my question to Eddie is, you're making the case for this perception-based chat GPT or technology, and I'm wanting to know whether it exists or when it's coming down the line. But before I ask that question, Susan.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also trying to think about how does that translate into the work that is happening in the education space and around inclusivity in particular. And the thing that comes to my mind is the work that happens around collection of perception-based data and co-creation of responses, ideally both with learners as well as with teachers and other parents and others that are in the ecosystem, and how critical that is for inclusivity, because unless you get the responses around preferences and a better understanding of what actually works in different contexts from users, then you lose the effectiveness. So I think there's a lot that happens or gets discussed in the innovation in the tech world around co-creation, co-design, and I'm wondering if there's a link there with what you're saying around perception-based data.
I would say it's not only perception-based data, it's in general machine learning, because what I see, I don't know if you're familiar with chess or what is the latest hype in chess. It is not Garry Kasparov against an AI, because the AI already won. It is not a kind of like Garry Kasparov then another chess master, but what is the latest combat these days is a lay chess player with a computer, with an AI, with a technology against other grandmasters or other people using their technology. And it's a kind of like a symbiosis between this technology helping these lay people to play better chess. And what I would say as an answer here is, it's not only perceptual computing, but it's also kind of like, how can you use technology to help the students, the children, but to help maybe also the parents that you mentioned, but help also the teacher to optimize and also to recognize certain white spots, for example, that you may address better, or where are unclear issues. And I think that is something that you already can do with today's technology, but if you go into perception-based technology, you can even do that better. So if you have, I don't know, refugees, people coming to a camp, maybe they have certain problems that you cannot recognize as a teacher, but maybe this technology may recognize it in a way because it's perception-based, it's not measurement-based.
Does it exist?
This technology is slowly built.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's not so much money going in as in other technology, but slowly this technology is built, yes.
So let's move on to something that you mentioned in passing, and indeed one of our audience members is asking our thoughts about data privacy concerns when using Facebook. You mentioned that your concerns are data surveillance of these, and I'm just wondering from Susan and Lulu, do you think these data privacy issues are really understood by educators? Is this something that concerns them? Is there much research done on this?
Yeah, I think it's something that people at the moment are it's kind of some realization is happening around the issues around data privacy and education. So one of the things to think about is that within education planning approaches, more and more there's more attention being given to ed tech and its use within education systems. And as a part of that, from a planning perspective, there's nods to the importance of data management, data privacy, but I think that there's so much that needs to be done because the capacities within education systems really aren't there.
Lulu, you're nodding your head. In your area of the world, is there a lot of concern about the data used in education and privacy of it and who owns it?
Not much concern, but yes, much more sensitization on that data. And I will mention even some of the projects that I've worked in, starting from early childhood, where we're collecting a lot of data about parents and children, and providing that data to teachers to be able to track the development of the children. But that management, who owns that data, the teachers. Most of the teachers don't know that. They do get some of that data. They're sharing that data with parents, the data with the community, that data is being shared with the government. But that data management piece, there isn't much capacity on that. That needs to change. That needs a lot of work at the moment.
Yeah, Eddie, I know you feel very passionate about what big tech is doing with data and data for education too.
I just think it's a hot topic and we should really care for that. Because when I had a talk with Urs, he said, like, now you are coming with an additional thing that is maybe not done yet in the field. And I understand, oh no, something more that someone might bring to this education in maybe poor countries. You do not have all that. But I think it's really important that we think about these problems that emerge. Because I can say something from a Swiss school. A big corporation in Switzerland, they started to sponsor schools here in Switzerland, and they wanted to own the data about the pupils in the school, the students. And if I had a chat with them and said, like, why do you want them? They said, like, yeah, we can do so beneficial stuff because we can then see the progress of certain students, and maybe we can then already get into contact with a company that they may work on, or the company may start to sponsor certain students. And I think that is a bit like an economic problem that emerged out of this data, because the data are the new oil. And we have to think, do we really want that? What is with the left behinds? What is with the people that do not get any sponsor if we go in this way? And so that's why I'm passionate about that we already start to think who is the owner of this data. And I pledge for that the one that create the data, that they should be the owner. And maybe we should create new models or think about new models, that this data is belonging to the school, to the ed tech providers, to the students. And if someone wants them, they can get it, but we need a marketplace maybe, and they should get something back for this data that others can learn with. So we should have some intermediary that collects the data, and if the students agree, or the school agree, even can sell it, but then the big corporation need to buy it. It's not for free anymore.
There we are. I wonder whether we'll get some questions on that. I'm going to take one of the questions which fits into the next area that we're going to discuss here, which is digital divide and then in investment. There was a question here which says, online services need even stronger connections to work. We now need at least a 4G connection for many sites. How do we cope in a weak internet zone? And this is a digital divide question. Lulu, I hand that one over to you.
Yes, online learning does require a lot of internet. Just here on this call, I've had to switch to like 3 internet providers just to make sure I have a stable connection for me to be here. But it's just not online learning itself. It's also access to those devices themselves that can access the internet, so smartphones and tablets and laptops and all that. But as COVID showed, it really did highlight that divide for people who have access to the internet and those that don't. And it was an opportunity to bridge that divide. But during that period of school closures, it really did kind of expand that divide. I'll give an example here. In Zambia, we have university students that live in some rural areas, and talking to some of the professors or lecturers, they couldn't continue with their learning because they were coming from a place that didn't have access to internet or even a smartphone. So once a week or once a month, they had to go to a central place, which we call the BOMA, to print out material or use an internet cafe. So it really did not help in those areas. But in terms of urban areas where people had access to internet, I did mention earlier, where you didn't need to use a lot of data to have your lessons via WhatsApp. But if the school insisted you do it via Zoom, then that was, again, an expense on the parents, which wasn't planned for during the COVID time. So it increased, the use of internet really increased that divide. And then coupling that with the access to digital devices.
Because there's a question that's come in here in French. Comment peut-on faire pour les zones sans accès à l'électricité, donc pas accès à la numérisation? Exactly, what can we do for the zones without access to electricity and therefore without access to connectivity? It is the big problematic.
In some areas, for example, in a project in Zimbabwe, there is a school, the schools are provided with solar-powered learning centers, and the resources are obviously mapped to the curriculum or can easily be mapped to the curriculum. These are open educational resources. And but the barrier there is because it's in a specific place in the school, during the time of COVID or when the children are not in school, they don't have access to those resources. They're going back to their homes and where there isn't any access to devices. But within that school setting, there's downloadable material that can easily be updated periodically, and therefore, and the tablets are charged overnight, as in the case of the projects in Zimbabwe, and the teachers, they're able to use them the whole day and therefore have access to resources that they wouldn't normally have.
There's a question from Rodrigo. I don't think most probably anybody here has necessarily got the answer, but how could we ensure that a good quality video conference service, like the one used in this conference, is available regionally and free or almost free? Your connection, by the way, is very good, Lulu, and it's better than sometimes the connection here between Geneva and France Voisine in Ferney-Voltaire, I have to say, which is particularly bad. I don't know how, if anybody's got a...
I don't know.
And Susan.
Sorry. Susan, you want?
Yes.
Okay. I also wanted to add to the other question that you had before about the education or without power system.
Yeah.
We once did. It was not in education, but it was in the slums of Nairobi. We once did a study where we could use code books, and then you could use low tech with codes and interact with smart technology on the other end. So maybe you could also use kind of like printed out stuff and connect it with low tech so that you do not need that much energy, that much technology or high tech, so that you can cope with kind of like checking if the students give the right answer or not, because they have to send the code to a certain number or something like that. And to your second question about like the 4G or more internet connection, I think there are, like Elon Musk's Starlink, there are kind of like drives towards this so that you have everywhere this kind of connection. But I think this is right now pretty expensive. But if you think of like maybe we can have license with them, with a company like that, then you can go wherever you want, and at least this connection you have. Still, power may be the one that is missing, but if you have solar power combined with that, so you can use also this kind of like technology. We are using the same stars, and we see all the satellite by Elon Musk, so why not using it for this as well?
Susan.
Yeah, I think this issue of investment in connectivity versus maybe it's not just either a versus, but a and or investment in education systems more broadly is really a thorny one. And there is certainly a school of thought that is really focused on, building in connectivity with schools. And equally, there's another school of thought that is more around let's look at different approaches of using tech. And in the early days of COVID, we were doing analysis around, what are the approaches that are no tech, low tech, and high tech, because there's options out there that can be used. And there's a real, I think in a frame of progressive universalism, I guess, which is, an overall approach in education, but in a way that is an approach that quite naturally is happening in terms of connectivity, I think, as well. And there's leaps that are happening as well, where kind of more personal access to connectivity is happening in places in East Africa, for instance, over and above, the public institutions. So I think it's looking at what's happening organically, trying to take grab those opportunities, but looking at the diversity of approaches in terms of tech in order to actually reach a whole spectrum of learners.
I'm going to ask you a few questions about investment, and then we've got so many questions coming in from our online and in-person audience, because of course tomorrow there will be lots of talk about in investment. Susan, what do you think? What should we take into consideration? Exactly that when investing in digitalisation. Is it connectivity? Is it devices? Is it tools? Is it new technology which is perception-based? Is it literacy? What is it?
Well, I think front and center should be the learner, and looking at opportunities for how technology can actually support learning outcomes. And if that's not front and center in terms of education investments, that's a mistake. So that would be most critical for me. And then I think it's again a progression where there needs to be investment at one end that supports experimental approaches and innovation, and as those as learning and evidence is gathered from different experiments, then support to scale. And I think there's questions about how far to scale, and that's very contextual. But governments are, having to make decisions about where do they put their money and in big investments on digital and technology. And so I think the evidence element in terms of how different approaches actually make a difference on learning outcomes should actually be front and center.
Lulu, what about you? Where do you think the investment should go?
I think because the beauty of this all is that the education system is an ecosystem. There isn't just, you can't just invest in one thing without thinking about the other and creating that balance. But agreeing with Susan that definitely the learner at the center of it, even before designing that EdTech program or that device or that activity should be the center of it. In Zambia, for example, we've just recruited a set of 30,000 teachers. But I think it's important too that in as much as we recruit teachers and we buy these devices, that we also put investment in teacher training, not just those digital skills, but the pedagogy to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, use the technology for the pupils' benefit, for learning outcomes, and which goes back again to whatever investment is happening, wherever it is, the children should be, the learners should be at the center of it. So I would very much, from seeing from my perspective here in Southern Africa, focus on the teacher development as a key part of the education technology space.
Yeah. Eddie, where would you put investment, and what role do you see for Switzerland, which prides itself on being a centre of innovation?
I second what the lady said, because I think the learners should be in the center. It should not be technology. I think that is a pity of these days, that we are in a digital transformation and it's going faster and faster, and often we are discussing only about digitalization and not about the humans anymore. And I think we should put the humans at the center, and we should use technology as a kind of tool. It's kind of like a hammer, and I have the nails and I want to do something with the hammer. It's better than to do it with a stone or something like that. So, but the human is the one that we should provide with technology. So I agree on that. But what I also would add is kind of like in the trainers or the educators, I would really, or maybe even higher, I would really put also a certain budget on thinking what happens with this data, because the data have a huge value that is maybe not really seen. So I come from a family of teachers. My father, my mother was teacher, my sister, my wife. So I have a lot of teachers around, and if I discuss with them, they don't see that. And I think that's a pity, because you could do so much with this data. You could help. And that's why I say I'm a healer. I want to heal with technology. But you could also destroy, or you could use this data to widen the gap between the ones that are able to use these data points and maybe misuse in the sense of the students. And I think we should really think very carefully about that.
So data, as you say, has a value, just like Google and Facebook have obviously realized the financial revenues that they can get. So a new way for funding education systems. I'm going to take some of the many questions that we've got. We've taken some, but there's many more that have come in, and I'm just going to take them from the ones which have got the most votes. How to promote digital literacy to low-resource parents, teachers whose priority is to work, indeed, and how to learn digital skills in a cultural context. Okay, two different questions there. Lulu, definitely the first one, I think. Yes, we know that parents have to work. How do we promote digital literacy to low-resource parents and teachers? And if you've got any thoughts on learning digital skills in a cultural context.
Promoting digital skills for parents and low-resource schools. There's been a number of projects and activities which come to a point of sustainability, because those are not ongoing now, even though new ones are coming up. I think Eddie had mentioned using low technology to have access to different materials. We also use USSD here. So we're in a space where, for example, it's booming mobile money market in Zambia, so you don't have to move around with cash, because we have a lot of people that aren't banked, but they have a mobile phone. I think about data shows about 89% of the population has a mobile phone. So, but not all those phones are smartphones, but they're phones that use USSD to access resources. And we had a project before that was funded by USAID that where parents could send in text messages of stories that they would then be written up by a teacher and sent back to them to use for the children to learn reading at home. And that was a really good project that wasn't scaled, which would have worked really well in the time of COVID, though something like that is coming up. So, and also just the sensitization in areas where we work in on the importance of education. It's not always, we're talking about it here, but it's not always that the kids are in school. There's some who are taken out of school. So if the parents could have access to learning materials that they can still use at home, and that's a different discussion on a poverty issue in low to middle income countries, that is a way to get it in, even using the same platforms such as the radio and the SMSs, and for those that do have access to the internet, using platforms like WhatsApp, which is huge here compared to Facebook and other social media platforms.
Yep, Susan.
During COVID, one of the things that we did through the EdTech Hub was support a number of primary research projects. And there was a really interesting project that IPA was studying in Ghana, where it was looking at the effect of nudges to different parent groups, different socioeconomic status. And one of the findings of that study was quite counterintuitive in a way, in that it found that the parents with no education or very, very low education, actually those nudges, at least in how they were delivered at the time, were counter-effective. They actually discouraged parents, and with some of the thesis being because they didn't have necessarily the capacity, they didn't have the digital literacy to engage, and so they were feeling more discouraged. But so I think this question of how to promote digital literacy is so contextual, and we don't have a lot of evidence at the moment about what actually works with different types of groups. So I think that's, from a behavioral change perspective, that's a huge area that really needs attention from an evidence perspective.
So we've only got a few minutes left. There's a good question here about how can we enforce data solidarity in data protection? Eddie?
Yeah, you asked me in the question before, you asked me also how can Switzerland help here? And I think what Switzerland is famous for is for direct democratic systems, federalistic system where you have different cantons in Switzerland and we still can collect the opinion of different people. And I think that is something that Switzerland is building technology also that might be provided to this country, and maybe we are not misusing the data. That's also something as a country as Switzerland may stand for, with a Swissness label on it. By the way, maybe you have seen the whole web page was built by a Swiss company here that is doing that already, or trying to do that, to address exactly these kind of questions. And when you are asking about this, I think we should create technology that is really bringing the data back to the students, to the teachers, to the schools, and then we should let them be an organization, an institution that is having the rights of their data and can do something with the data. And in return, you get something back if you, for example, sell them or whatever.
Absolutely.
So I think we should go in a direction like that, so that the data is really not belonging to, it's still Meta. WhatsApp is still Meta, it's Facebook, and WhatsApp is similar. So it should not belong to Meta, in my way.
So a point absolutely made there. I love the question of Danielle. Aren't we just outsourcing soft skill development for critical thinking to a machine rather than investing in more empathetic teachers? I think that's most probably a question to all three, and most probably that's the one we might end on because there is a coffee break coming up. I'll just go round. Susan.
Well, I think it's around how one uses technology, and one of the things that Lulu emphasized was the potential of a focus on teacher professional development. And I think, as facilitators, as the kind of linchpin in education systems, I think there's a huge amount of potential that technology can actually better support teachers. So I think there's possibilities there. But I think overall as well, there's so much that can be learned in terms of how education technology is used that can come back into the classroom, like things like using more short form and creative content, reward and recognition tools, awareness campaigns, tracking and outreach to poorly engaged students. So I think there's a real space to be learning from kind of the more tech end of things and bringing that into education.
Lulu, we just need more empathetic teachers rather than outsourcing soft skill development for critical thinking to a machine?
We need a bit of both. We can't run away from the technology, unfortunately. I was listening. It's going to be here whether we like it or not. It's going to be in the classrooms and it's going to be developed. How do we make the most of it? Can't we use the technology then to have more empathetic teachers? So it's definitely both from my end, because the technology is not going anywhere. We just need to make sure that we use it in the right way. And I think that's where Eddie will come in with the data and how that technology can be built to make sure we do that.
There we are. You've applied a bit of fuzzy logic, if I've understood. It's not a yes, no, it's a yes and answer. Very briefly, Eddie.
I second that, but I see, like, if you have, for example, medical doctor these days, they can use technology to have better treatments in the end, because technology is capable of using all these data of the patients and whatever, and can also scroll through all the data elsewhere and maybe to provide certain solutions to the medical doctor. So the medical doctor can now rely on other data points, also on other opinions from other doctors maybe, and the same applies here. So it should free the teachers, that they can be more free, because they can be more emotional, can be more interactive with the students, and the machine is on the other part that should support the students and the teachers.
There we are, the machine supporting the teachers to be freer. Let's end on that note. Thank you very much for some fantastic questions, which really are almost a conference or a working session in themselves, especially about online risks to children, which I think should be given more time than we've got now at the moment. But thank you, Lulu. You had a great connection, and thank you for being very adaptive, or whatever the word is, by going from one connection to another, because it's been great having you join us from Lusaka. Susan, thank you very much for updating us on some of the research that's going on, and Eddie, for giving us an insight, the beginning of fuzzy logic and what it can do. So thank you, everybody from our remote audience, and thank you, everybody here in the room. There's a coffee break now, and Urs has the wonderful job of synthesizing all of this in 4 minutes. I'm going to be fascinated. He's going to report back after the coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you.